For decades, Hugh Jackman spoke about his marriage as if it were one of the strongest relationships in Hollywood. In interviews, on red carpets, and during emotional award speeches, he constantly described Deborra-Lee Furness as the center of his life, the woman who believed in him before fame arrived, before blockbuster success transformed everything, and before the world knew his name. To fans, they seemed untouchable. While countless celebrity relationships collapsed under pressure, scandal, or ego, Hugh and Deborra-Lee appeared different. They looked stable, real, genuine. Their marriage became a symbol of loyalty in an industry famous for instability. That's exactly why the ending shocked so many people. After nearly 30 years together, their divorce was finalized in 2025. Then, only months later, reports began circulating that Hugh was already preparing for a future with Sutton Foster. Entertainment headlines suddenly shifted from admiration to speculation. One of Hollywood's most respected love stories no longer looked quite the same. And almost immediately, the public began asking uncomfortable questions. How long had things really been falling apart behind closed doors? Was the separation truly sudden? Or had the emotional distance between them quietly existed for years while the cameras still captured smiling photographs and polished red carpet appearances? For nearly 2 years after news of the separation became public, Deborra-Lee remained remarkably quiet. She didn't sit down for explosive television interviews. She didn't publicly insult Hugh. She didn't launch social media attacks or try to control every headline. Instead, she disappeared from the noise. While gossip channels and entertainment websites endlessly analyzed the breakup, she focused on her own life privately. To many mature audiences watching from the outside, that silence felt significant. Sometimes silence says more than anger ever could. Then something changed. Reports surfaced suggesting Hugh and Sutton's relationship had become serious extremely quickly. Several entertainment outlets even claimed marriage discussions were already happening behind the scenes. Suddenly, the timeline itself became part of the story. To longtime observers, the speed raised difficult questions. Was this truly a relationship that only began after the marriage ended? Or had emotional closeness started developing long before the public announcement? And perhaps for older audiences, another question felt even more personal. Can any relationship survive decades of fame, pressure, constant travel, public expectations, and emotional exhaustion without eventually changing underneath the surface? Because long marriages rarely collapse overnight. Usually, they shift slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. What made the story even more emotional for longtime fans was the history between Hugh and Deborra-Lee, a history that stretched back long before Hollywood fame entered the picture. When they first met in the mid-1990s on the Australian television series Corelli, Deborra-Lee was already an established actress with experience, confidence, and industry respect. Hugh, meanwhile, was still trying to find his footing as a young actor with enormous ambition but very little international recognition. At the time, almost nobody outside Australia knew who he was. She had already built a career. He was still chasing one. Despite a 13-year age difference, something tabloids constantly discussed throughout their relationship, the connection between them reportedly formed very quickly. Hugh later admitted in interviews that he knew almost immediately she was the woman he wanted to marry. There was something about her confidence that drew him in. Friends who observed them during those early years often described Deborra-Lee as emotionally grounded and fiercely intelligent. She wasn't dazzled by fame because she already understood the entertainment industry. Perhaps that balance helped Hugh during the uncertain early stages of his career. They married in 1996. At the time, nobody could have predicted how dramatically their lives would change. Within just a few years, Hugh Jackman exploded into global superstardom through the X-Men franchise and his iconic portrayal of Wolverine. Suddenly, the unknown Australian actor became one of the most recognizable faces in the world. Everything changed almost overnight. Movie premieres, international travel, massive contracts, endless media attention. And through all of it, Deborra-Lee remained beside him. Think about that for a moment. How many relationships survive when one partner becomes globally famous while the other sacrifices privacy, stability, and sometimes even career momentum to support the family behind the scenes? Because fame doesn't only transform the celebrity. It transforms everyone around them. Over the years, Hugh consistently praised Deborra-Lee in public. He spoke about her strength, her loyalty, and the sacrifices she made to keep their family grounded despite enormous fame. Fans admired the way he talked about her. Unlike many celebrity husbands, he seemed genuinely proud of his wife. People believed them. They became proof that Hollywood marriages could survive. But behind closed doors, life was not always easy. The couple faced painful fertility struggles that deeply affected them both. They reportedly endured IVF treatments and heartbreaking miscarriages before eventually adopting their 2 children. Although Hugh occasionally spoke publicly about the emotional difficulty of those years, Deborra-Lee carried much of the pain privately. And for many women watching their story unfold, that detail mattered deeply. Women from her generation were often taught to endure emotional hardship quietly. They protected their families. They absorbed disappointment privately. They continued functioning even when emotionally exhausted. There were no viral confession videos back then. No social media sympathy campaigns. Pain stayed inside the home. Over time, Deborra-Lee became a passionate advocate for adoption reform in Australia, dedicating significant energy toward improving the system for families and children. Meanwhile, Hugh's career continued reaching extraordinary heights through blockbuster films, Broadway productions, global tours, and international recognition. And somewhere inside that balance, another difficult question slowly emerged. When one person's career becomes enormous, how much does the other person quietly give up to keep the relationship functioning? Because sacrifices inside long marriages rarely happen dramatically. Usually, they happen gradually. Missed opportunities, postponed dreams, career compromises, relocations, emotional adjustments, years of quietly placing someone else's needs first. From the outside, audiences only see glamorous photographs and smiling interviews. They don't see the loneliness that sometimes develops when 2 people slowly begin living completely different lives under the same roof. Then came 2022. That year, Hugh starred opposite Sutton Foster in the Broadway revival of The Music Man. The production became a major success, and audiences immediately noticed the chemistry between the 2 performers. Their interviews felt warm. Their interactions appeared effortless. Critics praised their connection on stage. Fans loved watching them together. But according to multiple entertainment reports, individuals connected to the production allegedly noticed Hugh and Sutton becoming especially close during the show's lengthy run. Neither publicly admitted to wrongdoing during the marriage. No confirmed scandal ever officially emerged. However, reports later suggested Deborra-Lee believed an emotional bond may have developed before the marriage fully ended. And for many people who've experienced heartbreak later in life, that distinction matters less than outsiders sometimes think. Because emotional distance can hurt just as deeply as physical betrayal. In fact, some people would argue it hurts more. Physical affairs can sometimes feel impulsive. But emotional disconnection often develops slowly, through conversations, attention, understanding, admiration, and emotional intimacy that gradually shifts away from the marriage itself. And perhaps that's why this story resonates so strongly with older audiences. Many people understand what it feels like when a relationship changes quietly long before it officially ends. The hardest part is often realizing the person beside you emotionally left months, or even years, earlier. As speculation intensified online, public reactions became increasingly divided. Some fans defended Hugh completely, arguing that relationships naturally evolve and people deserve happiness after divorce. Others sympathized deeply with Deborra-Lee, especially considering the decades she spent supporting their family while Hugh's fame skyrocketed globally. But there was also another layer to the discussion: aging. For years, tabloids obsessively focused on the age difference between Hugh and Deborra-Lee. Critics unfairly questioned their relationship from the beginning, often suggesting she looked older than him or didn't fit the glamorous Hollywood image expected beside a global male star. Those comments followed them for decades. And now, with Hugh reportedly moving forward with someone closer to his age, many observers revisited those old headlines with new discomfort. Was Deborra-Lee quietly carrying insecurities the public never fully understood? Did years of media scrutiny slowly create emotional damage beneath the surface of the marriage? And how much pressure does Hollywood place on women as they age compared to men? Because the truth is difficult to ignore. Older male celebrities often continue being celebrated, desired, and romantically linked to younger or glamorous partners. Meanwhile, women frequently face brutal criticism simply for aging naturally. Many viewers recognized that imbalance immediately. What also made the story feel especially tragic was how often Hugh had publicly described Deborra-Lee as his emotional anchor. In countless interviews over nearly 3 decades, he credited her for keeping him grounded and emotionally stable while navigating fame. Those statements now feel different to some fans. Not necessarily dishonest, but complicated. Because people can deeply love each other and still slowly grow apart. That reality may be one of the most painful truths about long-term relationships. Love alone does not always prevent emotional distance. Shared history does not guarantee permanence. And public admiration certainly doesn't reveal private struggles. Behind the scenes, fame can slowly reshape a marriage in ways outsiders never fully see. Long filming schedules create separation. Constant travel creates emotional gaps. Public attention creates pressure. And over time, two people may begin evolving in completely different directions. Sometimes they notice it early. Sometimes they don't notice until it's too late. As discussions surrounding Hugh, Deborra-Lee, and Sutton continued dominating entertainment headlines, many older viewers saw something more personal reflected in the story. Not celebrity gossip. Not scandal. But the painful reality that relationships change with time. People change. Needs change. Dreams change. And after decades together, some couples eventually discover they are no longer emotionally standing in the same place. That realization can be devastating. Especially when the relationship once seemed unbreakable to the outside world. Even now, neither Hugh nor Deborra-Lee has publicly revealed every private detail surrounding the end of their marriage. And perhaps they never will. After nearly 30 years together, some wounds may simply remain too personal for public explanation. But maybe that silence itself tells part of the story. Not every heartbreak ends with screaming arguments or public accusations. Sometimes marriages end with exhaustion. With distance. With two people quietly realizing the life they built together no longer feels the same. And perhaps that is why so many people remain fascinated by this story. Because beneath the celebrity headlines lies something painfully human. A woman who supported a man before the world loved him. A man who spent decades publicly praising the woman who stood beside him. And a relationship that, despite years of loyalty, history, sacrifice, and shared memories, still could not escape the pressures that so often change people over time. So now the question many people continue asking is not simply whether Hugh Jackman moved on too quickly after the end of his marriage. The deeper question is far more uncomfortable, and far more relatable for millions of people watching the story unfold from the outside. Can any relationship truly survive fame, time, sacrifice, emotional change, and decades of pressure without eventually becoming something completely different from what it once was? And perhaps even more importantly, when the cameras stop rolling, the interviews end, and the headlines finally disappear, how many seemingly perfect relationships are quietly carrying the same emotional distance behind closed doors? That is the part of this story that continues haunting people. Because for nearly 3 decades, Hugh Jackman and Deborra-Lee Furness were presented to the world as one of Hollywood's rare success stories. In an industry filled with short-lived romances, scandals, betrayals, and carefully manufactured publicity relationships, they appeared different. Stable. Genuine. Untouchable. Fans watched them age together. They watched them defend each other publicly through criticism, career changes, and constant speculation. Over the years, Hugh repeatedly described Deborra-Lee as his greatest supporter, the person who grounded him emotionally while his career exploded globally. He spoke about her with warmth so consistently that audiences eventually stopped questioning whether it was real. People simply believed it. And maybe that is why the separation shocked audiences far more deeply than many other celebrity divorces. Because this wasn't supposed to happen to them. By 2023, however, subtle cracks had already begun drawing attention from people who closely followed the couple's public appearances. In April of that year, Hugh shared affectionate anniversary tributes online, praising Deborra-Lee in the same loving tone fans had heard for years. The posts felt familiar, comforting almost, like reassurance that some Hollywood marriages could still survive the chaos surrounding them. Then came May. The couple appeared together at the Met Gala, smiling confidently for photographers while cameras flashed from every direction. To outsiders, they looked polished and united, exactly as they always had. But only months later, the world learned they were separating. That sudden shift left many people stunned. How could a couple appear so connected publicly while privately moving toward the end of a 27-year marriage? Was the separation truly sudden? Or had the emotional distance already existed quietly for years behind closed doors? Those questions became even more intense after the couple released their official statement. The wording was calm, respectful, and measured. They spoke about individual growth, evolving paths, and gratitude for the years they shared together. It sounded mature, carefully controlled, almost too controlled. And mature audiences especially recognized something familiar in that language. Because sometimes the most polished public statements hide the messiest private realities. People who have lived through long marriages understand this better than anyone. Relationships rarely collapse overnight after nearly 3 decades together. Usually, the final separation is only the visible ending to years of emotional exhaustion, quiet disappointments, unresolved resentment, or growing emotional distance that nobody else can see. And then came the moment that changed public perception completely. After remaining mostly silent for a long period, Deborra-Lee Furness finally described the experience as a traumatic journey of betrayal. That single word, betrayal, immediately shifted the emotional tone surrounding the divorce. Because words chosen after years of silence are rarely accidental. People began re-examining everything they thought they knew about the relationship. Suddenly, old interviews, affectionate speeches, public declarations of love, and red carpet appearances felt different when viewed through the possibility that serious pain may have existed privately all along. And that raises another difficult question. How often do couples continue performing happiness publicly long after emotional connection has already faded privately? In Hollywood, appearances are part of survival. Celebrities build brands around their personal lives. Public image becomes intertwined with professional success. Fans emotionally invest in love stories because they want to believe lasting love still exists somewhere, especially in industries built around illusion. But maintaining that image year after year can become its own kind of pressure. Imagine spending decades being viewed as the perfect couple. Imagine feeling obligated to continue presenting stability even during periods of emotional struggle. At what point does protecting the image of a marriage become more exhausting than protecting the marriage itself? Around the same time, reports surrounding the divorce finances began attracting major attention as well. Claims surfaced suggesting Deborra-Lee secured sole ownership of their Manhattan penthouse shortly before officially filing for divorce. For many observers, that detail suggested preparation, not impulsiveness. It hinted that private decisions may have been unfolding quietly long before the public announcement arrived. Again, older audiences understood this instinctively. Major life decisions after a 27-year marriage rarely happen suddenly. Emotional separation often begins long before legal separation does. Sometimes people stay together publicly while privately grieving the relationship that already ended months or even years earlier. And perhaps that is one reason this story resonates so deeply beyond celebrity gossip. Because it reflects ordinary human experiences hidden beneath extraordinary wealth and fame. The reported financial scale of the divorce also surprised many fans. Over nearly 3 decades, Hugh Jackman built a massive fortune through blockbuster films, Broadway performances, endorsements, international tours, and real estate investments. To the public, Hugh became one of Hollywood's most admired entertainers, charismatic, disciplined, talented, and universally likable. But many observers pointed out something important that headlines often overlooked. That success did not happen in emotional isolation. Long marriages are partnerships, especially when one person's career demands relentless travel, media obligations, filming schedules, public appearances, and global attention. Behind every major celebrity career, there is often another person absorbing enormous emotional weight privately, maintaining family stability, emotional support, and personal sacrifice while cameras focus elsewhere. That does not mean one person created the other's success. But it does mean success is rarely achieved alone. And maybe that explains why public reactions became so divided. Some people defended Hugh completely. They argued relationships naturally evolve, people grow apart, and nobody should remain trapped in unhappiness simply to satisfy public expectations. Life changes people. Emotional needs change. Priorities change. Others sympathized deeply with Deborra-Lee. They saw a woman who spent decades supporting a marriage publicly, standing beside one of the world's most famous actors through every stage of his rise, only to eventually watch the relationship collapse despite years of public promises about everlasting love and devotion. And somewhere between those opposing views lies the uncomfortable complexity of real relationships. Because sometimes nobody is entirely innocent. And sometimes nobody is entirely guilty either. Then another layer of intrigue emerged. Reports began circulating that Deborra-Lee Furness had considered writing a memoir discussing both the marriage and the divorce. Whether those reports ultimately proved true or not, the possibility alone generated enormous public fascination. Because if she does decide to speak openly one day, millions of people will want to hear her side. And honestly, can you blame them? For decades, she largely remained dignified and protective of the relationship publicly. She rarely fueled scandals, rarely retaliated against rumors, rarely appeared interested in turning private pain into media attention. But after years of silence, does someone eventually earn the right to tell their own story? Or should private pain remain private forever, even when the relationship itself was lived so publicly? That question alone sparked fierce debate online. Some believe revealing intimate details after a divorce is unnecessary and damaging, especially when children and family are involved. Others argue silence often protects public image more than emotional truth, and that speaking honestly after years of restraint is not betrayal at all. Perhaps it is simply reclaiming one's voice. What makes this story especially powerful for older audiences is that it touches themes far bigger than celebrity culture. It is about loyalty. It is about emotional endurance. It is about sacrifice quietly made behind the scenes while the world applauds someone else in the spotlight. And perhaps most painfully of all, it is about how relationships slowly transform over time, sometimes so gradually that the people inside them barely notice until one day they realize they are no longer the same couple they once were. For years, Hugh Jackman and Deborra-Lee Furness represented stability in an industry famous for instability. Together, they appeared to survive age gap criticism, intense Hollywood pressure, demanding careers, public scrutiny, and the emotional strain that destroys many celebrity marriages long before reaching even 10 years. Yet in the end, their marriage collapsed the same way countless ordinary relationships collapse every year. Quietly at first. Then suddenly all at once. And maybe that is why so many people remain fascinated by this story long after the initial headlines faded. Because beneath the celebrity status, expensive homes, red carpets, and worldwide fame lies something deeply human and painfully recognizable. The fear that love can change. The fear that time can quietly reshape two people into strangers. The fear that public happiness does not always reflect private reality. Did Hugh Jackman truly mean every loving word he spoke over those decades? Most people probably believe he did at the time. But can genuine love still fade later? Can two people sincerely love each other for years and still eventually become emotionally incompatible? And if that happens, does it erase everything that came before? Or is it simply the tragic reality of human relationships? One thing, however, seems increasingly clear. Deborra-Lee Furness is no longer remaining completely silent. And after spending decades standing beside one of the world's biggest stars, many people believe she may finally feel that her own voice deserves to be heard too. So now we turn the conversation over to you. Do public declarations of love actually mean anything in Hollywood anymore? Can relationships truly survive massive fame and constant attention for decades? And if Deborra-Lee eventually tells her full story publicly, would that be betrayal or simply honesty after years of silence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.